Hi everybody, my name is Alysa McCall and I'm with Polar Bears International and we are broadcasting to you today live from Buggy 1 in Churchill, Manitoba. So this is BJ Kirschhofer. BJ, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm BJ Kirschhofer and I'm the Director of Field Operations for Polar Bears International and also part-time captain of Buggy 1. Monday through Friday, I sit in this seat over here and drive the polar bear cam around. And on the weekends, KT Miller is the captain of Buggy 1. Yeah.
Cool. Well, some of you, I think, joined us last year, so it's fantastic to have you back again. And some of you are probably new to this Tundra Buggy cam, so maybe we can explain a little bit about what's going on here. First of all, we would love to thank Explore.org for helping us do this. Explore.org, of course, provides just a ton of help getting these cameras up and running. They're a huge partner of ours. We couldn't do a lot of what we do without them. Also, Frontiers North Adventures. They are the owners of the Tundra Buggy and Tundra Buggy Lodge, and they donate Buggy 1 to us all through bear season so that we can do these educational outreach programs and talk to people all around the world from polar bear country. So that's pretty darn cool. We'd also like to thank Parks Canada, who's been really instrumental in helping us set up our Cape cams, which we will also talk about, and maybe you will see. So with that, why are we here right now? Well, it's polar bear season because it's the polar bear migration coming through Churchill right now. We are on the coast of Hudson Bay at the moment, and Hudson Bay is a large body of water that's relatively shallow, and it completely freezes over in the winter and completely melts in the summer. And when it freezes over, there's sea ice, and polar bears love sea ice, and polar bears live all around the coast of Hudson Bay. And when there's sea ice, we can't see them. They're out there and they're hunting seals. They use sea ice mainly for hunting seals, also for traveling, mating, and some aspects of reproduction. Some polar bears den on the sea ice. But in Hudson Bay, they den on land because in the summer, the ice completely melts and we see polar bears come onto shore and just wait for the next round of seal hunting. And right now, they've been waiting since about July. And it's almost time for the bay to freeze up. We don't know when it will be, but it should be within the next 2 to 6 weeks. And the bears know this. Whether they know it because the light's changing or the temperature's changing, we're not too sure. And so they're lining up along the coast. So I got a message that they're only intermittently hearing us. Can we do anything about the audio? Okay, we're going to check the audio and maybe we'll do another quick intro. Thanks for bearing with us during our first live chat of the season, everybody. Okay, we're just going to keep talking. So let's talk a little bit about, well, how about we talk about the summer? So for anyone that was watching the cams in the summer, you maybe saw the Beluga cam, which is also live from Churchill, Manitoba. And that was with the very incredible Haley Shepard as the boat captain. And Haley's on one of her other jobs right now as a polar bear tour guide. And so she's out somewhere here right now, bringing groups of tourists around and talking about polar bears. And that she just has huge shoes to fill. She's an incredible guide. And so we'll do our best to kind of tell you guys about polar bears throughout the season and keep in touch. And then maybe if we can get Haley on here sometime this year, we'd love to do that. She's wonderful. And we've already seen her this year, and she's having a great time watching polar bears. So we do have one polar bear outside our buggy right now. This guy, likely a male, but hard to tell from such a distance. He's just been sleeping. He's pretty unperturbed by all of this. We have one other buggy watching him, and he's barely moved. So a lot of the bears that are around here right now, they are kind of they're in a fasting state. So we used to say that there was, or think that there was a state of walking hibernation. So polar bears don't hibernate like other bears, but we figured, well, maybe during the summer they lower their metabolic rate and kind of go into some sort of hibernation state. But we found out from some research that came out this year that they don't actually do that. So they're simply fasting. It's been quite a while since they've eaten a really solid meal. You may see some polar bears on the cam eating kelp. In the summer, some polar bears like to eat goose eggs, kind of anything they can find. Bears just love food. Bears like being fat. But these polar bears, they really need the fat from the seals. That's where they're getting their calories. They have huge bodies. Their digestive systems are really evolved to eat fat and not the amounts of carbohydrates and proteins that brown bears or even black bears would eat. So these bears are really looking for their first seal of the season, hopefully in the next month or two. So we're going to keep talking about stuff, but we'll sprinkle in some questions while we're doing this. Let's just start off with one for BJ. So we are in the middle of the tundra right now, and we're on this little vehicle, and we're quite a ways from town. So we are remote broadcasting. How the heck are we doing this, BJ, and what are some challenges with making this happen?
We definitely have a lot of help from Explore.org and some of their contractors to help bring the internet out here. But basically, we're using more or less amped up wireless Wi-Fi technology. It's directed in a single direction instead of in all directions like your hotspot at home. And that is able, with big antennas and tall towers, to be able to be blasted across the tundra to a moving vehicle like we have here. So it's a unique application for this type of technology. I think a lot of it's designed for sort of point-to-point communications, but to put it on a vehicle like this in an area like this is unique, like I say. So there's definitely a lot of challenges that come along with that. Because we are in the subarctic here outside Churchill, the weather is just nasty, especially this time of year. It's blowing, it's cold. There's a lot of stuff that makes it so these electronics don't really want to work. And it's uncomfortable for people to work too. So there's been a lot of challenges that we face. I mean, everything from ice building up on our antennas to having to go visit these sites to check on stuff when it's like 40 degrees below zero or colder. So, there's a challenge there that I find pretty fun.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you find it fun. It's not the thing I'm good at doing, but everyone just loves BJ out here because he's providing internet for just huge groups of people. We also, one place we work with out here is the Churchill Northern Study Center, and that's a big research center that's about half an hour outside town, not too far from where we are right now. And throughout the year, they host scientists to do research. They are hosting some learning vacations right now during bear season, and it's just the most incredible northern research facility. We kind of joke that when we're doing field work from Churchill, doing polar bear work or anything, it's really luxurious compared to doing research in other parts of the Arctic because we're coming back to a great meal and warm rooms and really high-tech equipment and different sorts of stuff at the end of the day, which is pretty neat. And it's with their help that we can get some of this internet blasting out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. It's a good partnership. Like I said, internet out here requires tall towers, and the Churchill Northern Study Center was once a rocket research range, and so they would shoot rockets into the atmosphere to study the northern lights. Now they have built a LEED Gold certified building, and they can house researchers like Alysa and some of the other polar bear researchers, or people looking at permafrost or birds or just about anything out here, and help support their operations. So it's a really fascinating facility. Now, we use their tower, and in turn, we give them internet. Some of the things that they use it for is not only their guests and their staff to be able to communicate back home, but also they have some long-term contract researchers there, people looking at the northern lights, folks looking at lightning in the Arctic here, folks looking at CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. So there's a lot of neat stuff going on out there. And of course, all that stuff requires computers. So they're able to pipe into these computers through the internet, through the bandwidth that we help provide, and they can log this data over a long period of time and then grab it via the internet. They don't have to make a big trip up here to get that stuff. So yeah, it's a great partnership. We love working with the CNSC.
Maybe you can talk a bit about the Aurora cam while you're...
Yeah, so we're really pretty pumped about this one, and I think Explorer is going to be really excited as well as the Explorer community. At the very top of this 180-foot tower, we helped install a camera that's real sensitive after dark, and it'll be able to point up into the night sky and stream the northern lights. Now, this time of year, the northern lights are a little bit hit and miss. It's often cloudy until the bay freezes up. But once the ice forms out there on the bay, it's going to be a fantastic camera. I don't know if some of you maybe saw the stuff captured by the Cape Churchill cameras last year. The Auroras were pretty fantastic. Now this camera can point up. and it's well off the ground. It's going to be a really neat point of view.
Super cool.
So stay tuned for that.
Well, we're getting some questions about some polar bears rolling in here. So there's one question about how do bears hunt on sea ice? Do they dive into the water? So there's a few different ways that bears hunt on sea ice. One of the best known and maybe one of the most common ways is called still hunting. And for seals, so the type of seals that polar bears are mainly going after are the ring seal, that's their main prey, but also bearded seal, and to a small extent around here, harbor seal. But let's talk about the ring seal. So ring seals, they kind of set up these home ranges out underneath the sea ice. And throughout the winter season, they're maintaining breathing holes. Because, of course, they're mammals, they need to breathe air. So they'll have a series of maybe 5 or 6 breathing holes that, of course, allow them to pop up and take a breath and then continue swimming underwater to find their fish. And polar bears have figured this out pretty well. And so if they're able to locate a seal breathing hole, they are very, very patient. And they will just sit very quietly, crouch down next to a seal hole for hours and hours on end. And as soon as a seal pops up, the polar bear is going to dive into that seal hole and using its massive teeth and claws, going to pull that seal up. And polar bears have really evolved. You can see the difference between brown bears and polar bears. Many of these adaptations are for this type, similar hunting of seals. So they've got, polar bears have a much kind of smoother, more sleek profile than grizzly bears. This is allowing them to get in and out of those seal holes. Their teeth, the back teeth, are much more for shearing and cutting meat and fat compared to the grizzly bear's back molars that are much more for grinding. And the polar bear claws are thick and sharply curved, and can also be used for traction on sea ice, actually, whereas the brown bear claws are long, lightly curved, and more used for digging. Other types of polar bear hunting techniques, we think that, they can probably be sitting on the side of an ice floe or a lead. A lead is an area of open water within the sea ice, and be waiting for seals to come up and dive in. They can probably do some pretty stealthy hunting. There's videos online of a seal resting on sea ice. So seals will haul out to have a break from swimming. And if the polar bear is able to sneak up either from underwater and up or over the ice, that's maybe a good way to get a seal. Very rarely polar bears will be able to maybe get a seal more in open water, but this is going to be when the seal's pretty unaware, maybe sleeping, maybe still pretty close to ice, because if you have a race underwater between a seal and a polar bear, the seal's going to win every time. Polar bears are excellent swimmers, but they're much more, and they can actually dive as well, but seals are a lot more agile, a lot more easily able to dive and maneuver underwater more quickly than a polar bear. So polar bears really need that sea ice to do the majority of their hunting. So that's why sea ice is so important. And we had another question about what they're eating at this time of year. So we had talked about that a little bit, but I know we got cut off to some extent. So right now we do see polar bears eating kelp. We'll see them eat goose eggs or carcasses when they can, but it's really the calories from fat and that seal fat that they're waiting for. So while on land, polar bears are losing roughly 1 kilogram of fat a day. And many of them, that's okay. They come on to shore with a lot of fat resources, fat reserves that they're living off of. But it's the younger bears and the females that are trying to reproduce later on this year that will struggle with any sort of decrease in their hunting time. So for female polar bears, they are mating in the spring, but they have something that's called delayed implantation. And this is when they may have a fertilized egg after mating, but they're not technically pregnant because that fertilized egg is not implanting until around this time of year. And that's after her body's kind of assessing how much fat does she have and does she have enough to fulfill a pregnancy. And we know that the threshold for a pregnant female polar bear, it's going to be around 420 pounds or so. And if she's below that, her body just physically can't really do a pregnancy. And it's the same with every mammal, including humans. There's, once you're a low enough weight, you just can't produce a child. And so polar bears at this time of year, if they are pregnant, if they have enough fat, they're going to go into their dens and they're going to do a sort of hibernation until they give birth later this winter and then emerge with their cubs next spring. So pregnant females at this time, they haven't eaten since around July, and they're not going to eat again until about February or March. So they can go quite a while without food. It's a really long time without food. I don't like going a few hours without food, and these bears are able to last quite a while. So it is pretty darn incredible. And we have some questions about, maybe we've got a question about cubs, so I'll answer that right now in that same vein. So polar bears have between 1 and 3 cubs a year. Triplets used to be more common in this area. Now we're seeing a lot more single and twin cubs. And the gestation, so the time between the actual pregnancy realizing itself and giving birth, it's only really a few months. Polar bear cubs are born very, very small. They're only maybe a pound at birth. And the mother to baby ratio of bears, actually in general, bears have the smallest babies compared to their own body size of any placental mammal, which is pretty cool. So for humans, one of our babies might be 1/15th the size of the mother. For bears, it's maybe 1/500th, or in one case with the panda, 1/1100th. That's crazy. So this is good for bears because it allows them to give birth fairly easily, but then those cubs grow really fast, drinking really fatty, rich milk from their mom. So it's pretty darn neat. Let's see what else. So is there any info on current ice conditions and weather, and are things above average or below for this year? So I'm not sure if we have too much information at the moment, scientific. Do you want Jen to join us, or?
We should ask Jen. Maybe
All right, let's
second,
do it.
And we'll just have Jen talk.
Well, what a treat, ladies and gentlemen. So we have with us this week, part of what PBI does during this time of year is our Tundra Connections programming through our own website. And with that, we bring up experts from all around the world and different areas, and we talk to all different groups. And so we have some broadcasts planned this week. And one of the experts with us this week is Dr. Jen Kay from the University of Colorado, and she is a climate specialist, sea ice expert, all that good stuff. And so maybe we will have Dr. Jen tell us a little bit about what's going on with the sea ice and the climate this year.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alysa. Hello, everyone. So let's see. September this year was actually the 4th lowest Arctic sea ice extent on record. So I guess if you have a question about how sea ice compares to like the recent past or the long-term climatology, well, the recent past, 4th lowest, we've had a couple of years before this that have had less sea ice, 2012 being one of them. But compared to the long-term average, like when satellites started measuring sea ice, we have, maybe 60% of what we used to have. That's Pan-Arctic, though. And here in Hudson Bay, I'm not as familiar with the specifics of what's going on here. But I know we've had increasing open water just about everywhere in the Arctic. So.
And while we have you here, there's a question about, will the El Nino have any effect on the sea ice? Do you know anything about that?
That's a good question. So El Nino, for those of you who aren't familiar, is basically when the tropical Pacific gets really warm. And this has impacts on the tropical atmosphere and ocean, but it actually has worldwide impacts. So when we have El Nino, we tend to have, for example, high global mean temperatures. It's one of the reasons 2015 might come out as the warmest year on record. The impacts on the Arctic will rely on something we call teleconnections. So that's how you basically connect the weather and the ocean conditions in the tropical regions with those in the Arctic. And those kinds of linkages do exist, but there's a lot of variability in the climate system. So it's a question of how strong they are. So I think there are some connections, but I don't think I would make my weather forecast based on them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can speak just a little bit to what happened during the breakup season this year. So every year in Hudson Bay, of course, there's the time when the ice freezes and a time when the ice breaks up and melts. And we know that the breakup season was a little bit interesting this year in this area. A wind event came through, and it pushed a lot of the ice in the western Hudson Bay over to the east and south. And so overall in Hudson Bay, the ice concentration was roughly normal. But if you looked regionally, it was quite different. It was a lot heavier east and south and a lot lighter in the west. And so what we saw from some of our collared bears was that a lot of them chose to ride the ice down and continue hunting. And now a lot of them would have gotten off in the province of Ontario or maybe more southern Manitoba. And I'm sure a few of them made their way back up, but maybe not all of them did. It's quite the energy trade-off. Polar bears need to decide what's worth it. Of course, Their body fat matters a lot to them, as we talked about. And so is it worth walking, or are they going to wait down there for the ice this year? So we'll have to wait and see what happens. So far, there are a few polar bears out here. And there's not a ton, but people have been seeing, I think one day a group saw 10 polar bears. There's been 8 polar bears. We've seen a couple today. It's a little bit windy today, and when it's a bit windy, they like to kind of hunker down. But it is getting colder, which is a great sign, and often when it's colder, we see more activity. And one of those activities we see is sparring, and we have a question about sparring, and it says, why do polar bears spar? Are they siblings? That's a great question. Maybe. They might be siblings. We think that a lot of times they're not necessarily siblings. It seems to be mostly the males, although there has been one case of people seeing a female spar up here, which in that one we were definitely wondering if she was sparring with her brother or something, because that's pretty rare. But usually it's a couple males, and we think it's largely kind of almost preparation for the mating season. They're kind of sizing each other up, figuring out their strengths, kind of having a good time too. Polar bears are pretty intelligent, and they like having things to do, and maybe it's a bit fun. Maybe they're learning what it's going to take to really go up against another male. One thing we do see at this time of the year, though, is if one of them gets tired or a little bit scratched or something, they usually back out of it pretty quick. It's really not worth fighting all out at this time of year, because there's just no reason. So we'll see them do it a little bit for fun and then kind of back down and go their own ways. However, in the spring, when they're actually fighting over females, things get pretty ugly. So they can inflict some pretty serious damage on each other, trying to get the lady who's ready to mate. And yeah, so they get a little bit of practice in at this time of the year. And of course, it's pretty amazing to watch. It's pretty cool. So maybe we'll see some of that this year. If we do, we will be very sure to show everyone on the Explore cams, because it's lots of fun. All right, let's see what else we have. Oh, there's a question about why are there fewer triplets these days. So we do believe that is linked to the sea ice. Even when there were triplets kind of, 30, 20 years ago, there's usually very clearly a runt out of the triplets. There's one that's a lot smaller, and it would be harder for that bear just to make it past, up higher to the ages. And there's competition among cubs to get their mother's milk, and we would see the runts kind of be pretty scratched up and all that. So not to say some of them couldn't make it to adulthood. I'm sure some did. But these days I just think it's harder for females to produce 3 cubs and raise them all, so it's almost like a waste of resources to have 3 cubs, and there's just not enough of the nutrition out here to really support that anymore, and that's why we think we're seeing a lot fewer triplets in this area. Absolutely. So another question: are the numbers of polar bears that are seen still good and not diminishing? Are they looking fed and happy? Yeah, so that's a great question. I think one thing to keep in mind, we're talking to you this year from Churchill, and we are in the middle of the Western Hudson Bay polar bear population. But there are 18 other polar bear populations around the world in 5 different countries. And so a lot of these polar bears have kind of different situations. They're going to be experiencing changes in the climate at different rates in different ways. They might have slightly different prey sources or pressures on them. And so in this area, we do know that sea ice is changing. This is the best studied polar bear population in the world. Canada has 2/3 of the world's polar bear population, which is pretty cool. The United States has 2 populations, and Canada has about 13. So that's pretty neat. And we have linked some changes in this population to climate change. So there was a period in about the late 90s, early 2000s where this population declined about 22%. Since then, we believe it has stabilized, as we would expect to see kind of dips and stabilizations as these bears adjust to shifts in their climate. And so right now, we think the population's right around between 900 to 1,000 bears. It's hard to know for sure. The ones we've seen this year, it's quite a mix. I've seen a couple pretty thin bears, but also quite a few that are looking fed and healthy. And so we'll just see what happens. There's what's happening here, it takes time, and we've got lots of time to make sure that these polar bears stay healthy and happy and that there's sea ice in Hudson Bay. And that's one of PBI's goals, is to keep polar bears in the Arctic always. And we do that by everyone's help, your help and the help of our partners, and just inspiring people to care about these beautiful animals, but also all the other Arctic animals that you guys are watching through the Explore cams and through other avenues. There's some pretty amazing wildlife out there. Some other wildlife we see out here often, well, at least often this year, there's quite a few snowy owls around here right now, which is pretty darn neat. So we're going to see if we can get some of those on cam at some point this season. There's been 1 or 2 Arctic foxes roaming around. It's actually kind of a low year for the foxes, but they're out here, so we'll keep an eye out for them, for you, and occasionally a red fox too. So we'll also look out for them, which is, yeah, lots of cool stuff going on. It's never boring out here. Maybe I'll talk a bit about the environment. So we are on the tundra, and the tundra is an area that's characterized by a short growing season and cold temperatures. So you will see some trees dotting the landscape out here. They're few and far between. And if you do see one, it'll look pretty small, but it could be over 100 years old. They grow very, very slowly out here, but it's pretty cool. A lot of the bushes you'll see are willows. There are just a ridiculous amount of willow species out here. It's pretty cool, and polar bears really like kind of laying in the willows. We get ptarmigan in the willows. Those are like the little Arctic chicken. They're pretty darn cute, so we'll look out for them. Yeah, but this area, on first glance, it can look kind of bleak or lifeless, but there's just so much going on out here. Okay.
And Alysa, I might add, too, that this is definitely the fall, and had you been up here about 3 weeks earlier, all the little willow bushes and things, their leaves change color before they drop, and so it's much like the fall in the Midwest or the western, eastern part of North America, in that everything, the whole tundra just looks to be on fire with all the different colors. The time, though, is pretty short. You got to catch it just a few days long, and then the wind picks up and all the leaves are gone. But at that time, it is just spectacular here. So I think it just kind of highlights, you really got to look close for the beauty here. I mean, there isn't big mountains and things like that some of us enjoy or things like that, but it is a really spectacular place if you really get down and look at some of the interesting things that are here.
Yeah, we sure like it.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to answer a question first about Aurora, maybe. So Explore.org had, we were following a collared bear this year named Aurora and her 2 cubs. And Aurora actually slipped her collar off, we think, out on the sea ice about mid-year. We have not yet spotted her, but if we ever do again, we are going to be sure to let people know. She could very well be around here. We just haven't seen her this year. Scientists haven't. So we're sure she's doing fine. And hopefully this year we'll have another bear for you guys to follow. And maybe this one will keep its collar on a little bit longer. But it's totally up to the bear. So we'll just have to wait and see. One thing... Yeah, so we don't ever collar adult males. Adult males have very thick necks compared to their heads, and they can just kind of pop the collar off I think I've heard their heads and necks referred to as like a pylon shape. It's just thick to thin. Females, their necks are a little bit thinner compared to their skulls, so we can put a collar on them a little easier, but they can still slip them off if they want to most of the time, or especially if they have cubs. Sometimes the cubs aren't really sure what's on mom and want it off, so they'll pull that right off. But it's really a pretty incredible way to get data on polar bears and understand what type of habitat matters to them, so that we can then hopefully conserve that habitat, plan for, if there's ever an oil spill in the Arctic. That collar data really helps inform us of where polar bears are, when and why. And so we can do things like mitigation, we can make plans, action plans, things like that. And just a host of our collar data is used for a lot of questions and answers, and it's pretty important. So,
can you tell us a little bit about the collar mechanisms itself and how they're able to just let them drop off too after a certain amount of time?
Yeah, so there are built-in collar mechanisms that, are programmed to fall off at certain times, so that the bear can just get rid of it if it hasn't pulled it off its head yet. And most of the time they work pretty darn well. And there's also some other mechanisms you can build in where if you're close to a polar bear, you have a remote control thing and hit a button and have it fall off. So we try to make sure that collars aren't on bears for too long. And they give us a lot of great data while they are on bears. So they've been pretty important. So let's see what other questions we have. Actually, maybe while I'm looking up more questions, maybe you could talk a little bit about the trail system here and maybe buggies. People are going to be seeing buggies roaming around, and what are they doing, and are they allowed to go anywhere, or what are the buggy rules?
Totally. So so there's a handful of buggies out here. In order to operate a buggy, the company has to have a permit. So there's only I think there's about 18 buggies out here, something in that neighborhood, less than 20 buggies. They're roaming around here on the shore of Hudson Bay. The two main companies, they've got an agreement where everybody stays on an existing trail network that we're told was created by the military when they were here. This is going back to those rocket range days and even earlier when the U.S. Military was here at Fort Churchill. So we stay on the trail largely because the Tundra takes a long time to repair itself. If we were to take one of these big heavy vehicles and just roam around wherever we please, we would scar the Tundra, and it would stay that way. And we just want to make sure we can preserve this place, take people out to see this place and help share that with you with the Explore cams, but also make sure we preserve the views that we have for people that will be here in the future. So we'll stay on the trails. You'll see once the lakes start to freeze up, then the buggies will start scooting across the lakes. That is fair game, although we'll have to wait just a little bit longer. We want to make sure we don't have to go swimming to try to retrieve a buggy if it goes through the ice. So that has happened in the past. But so it's about peak polar bear season here. So the buggies are definitely in full swing. And as you see, there's been a couple of them zipping behind us here. Zipping might be a bit of an exaggeration. They don't go that fast, but yeah.
Thanks. Maybe one thing I think is pretty interesting. So you guys will see some Cape cams on the explore.org polar bear cam list there, and Cape is actually a little ways from here. It's more than a few kilometers out, and we only really go there once a year with any buggies, and it's a pretty special spot. And one of the reasons it's so special is because there's a little tower out there that was used by kind of one of the first big polar bear biologists years ago. Can you tell us a little bit about the Cape Tower history and how we came to have cams on there now and why those cams are super cool?
Yeah, definitely. So it's been a project that's near and dear to my heart because I helped kind of restore this tower. But going a long time back, maybe in the, about late 70s, I think, Dr. Ian Sterling, he decided he wanted to look at polar bear behavior and what polar bears do. And so he had a tower erected right outside here at a place called Cape Churchill to look at polar bears. So he could stand in there, or his grad students could sit inside the tower with binoculars and just watch polar bears in their own environment, undisturbed.
There was no internet back then, so.
There was no internet back then. In fact, you can hear they tell wild stories. I mean, this isn't going that far back. Late 70s into the 80s, they had a radio phone out there, or just a radio, and you'd have to, when you're ready for a pickup from an airplane, you'd either have a predetermined date, and if the weather was good, they'd come get you, or you'd have to radio back to town, and hopefully somebody was listening. So it's a lot different now. Now we've spent a lot of time out there refurbishing this tower to make sure it's safe for people to be in, and then hanging the Explore cameras on. So the same views that Dr. Sterling saw in the late 70s, we can now share with the world. On top of that, there's internet out there. So every time I fly out, generally to test the internet, I Skype my dad just to check the connection. And so isn't that a change from the 70s, So so it's a unique structure. It's about 50 feet tall. It was a fire lookout tower from the southern part of Canada, and Ian Sterling arranged to purchase it, had it set on the side of the railroad tracks, and it was brought up by train to Churchill here, flown out all the way out to Cape Churchill, and then it was put up by the power guys in town. So they have a lot of hydroelectric power here in Manitoba. So the power company is called Manitoba Hydro. The hydro guys erected this tower. Ian Sterling told me you didn't want a bunch of biologists setting up a tower, and that's probably why probably why the tower's still standing. It was pretty strong. Now, we had an engineer look at it. We had to fix a few things on it, but the thing, it's going strong. And I mean, you've seen these cameras blowing around out here. It's windy here. It's really windy. Last winter, there was a couple days it was blowing 120 kilometers an hour. The tower's still standing. So it's a neat place. Now the tower's in Wapusk National Park. I think in about year 2000 or so, the park was established. And it's a neat place. So check it out on the Explore cameras when you're poking around on the different polar bear cams.
Cool. We were laughing. We've had a couple windstorms since we've been here, and when we're staying even in town, in our houses in town, the toilet's shaking. The toilet water's shaking. And that's when you know it's super windy. Yeah, there's the waves in the toilet. It's pretty darn funny. It's makes sleeping almost comforting in a way. It's like being in a cradle. It's pretty funny. So, yeah, and like we said, when it's pretty windy, the polar bears are likely to do what this guy's doing here, just kind of hunker down, find a bit of a restful spot. If it's calm and super cold, they're pretty happy, but usually when it's a little bit windy, they're more likely to lay down. So that's what we're seeing, but we'll sure let you know if he gets up. He's having a nice nap. So we have another question. Is the ice forming any later or earlier than in the past? And if so, how are the bears adapting? Are they staying in Churchill longer now than in the past? So the ice, compared to 30 or 40 years ago, we do see a trend where the ice is forming later on average and melting earlier on average. So the difference between then and now is about 3 to 4 weeks. And of course, this varies by year. Some years we still have ice that's great for polar bears, but we're seeing more often poor ice years or a shortening ice season overall. So it's really hard to predict what we're going to see year to year, and there's a lot of factors that go into it, but we are seeing a shift over time, absolutely. And, we are seeing polar bears respond to this. So we know that female body condition seems a lot more tied to the sea ice than male body condition. So we are seeing changes in females. They are getting smaller, having fewer cubs. And I don't know the stats on the polar bears coming into town, to be honest. I do know that the Polar Bear Alert program in Churchill has been very successful. So Churchill, of course, is right on the shores of Hudson Bay, polar bear capital of the world. And they're seeing, polar bears are coming through town every year. Throughout the kind of spring, summer, fall, and they have ways to deal with this. So they really want to avoid as much human-bear conflict as possible. They want to cut that right down. Sometimes this means hazing a bear to keep it away from town. If there's a problem bear that comes back year after year after year, they may hold it in their polar bear holding facility for up to 30 days. And this is just a safe spot for bad bears who want to get into town. So these bears are held there, and then when the ice comes in or after 30 days, they're flown to a more appropriate area in the region and then released. And then we hope that they don't come back. And we don't want them to come back because, every time, there's a chance for human-bear conflict, it's not good for humans or bears. There's also other communities along the coast of Hudson Bay that are dealing with seeing a lot more bears in town. The community of Arviat in Nunavut is dealing with that right now. They're having a lot more polar bears seen around town, come through town for various reasons. One of the reasons we believe is that the sea ice just isn't around long enough. The bears are being more drawn to maybe the smells, food, or just whatever. They're just on land longer, so they're more likely to get, into human trouble. And we want to cut that down because, well, like I said, we don't want run-ins with polar bears. We want to keep them in their world and us in ours, and just, respecting them as much as possible. And so there's some really great people working on that issue and putting more solutions in place to reduce the amount of bears that are coming into contact with us. And we want to also keep the kids safe. And that's one thing that's coming up. This coming weekend is Halloween. And that's a pretty big deal in Churchill, and I'm sure Arviat too. I know in Churchill they have a lot of extra patrols all day. They're making sure there's no bears anywhere near town so that the kids are allowed to trick-or-treat in peace and have a great time and not have to worry about it. There's
volunteers also park around town, around the perimeter, and sit and watch for bears that could potentially be walking in from the coast. So it's really a community effort to make sure that kids can wander around in their costumes and pick up candy.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Everyone wants kids to have candy on Halloween. So, yeah, it's a pretty neat community event, actually. Everyone working together. You've volunteered on that before, haven't you?
Volunteered, helped out some of the locals there, watch for bears. It's a pretty simple job. Mostly you're sitting in a vehicle somewhere, just chatting with folks, and looking out the window for bears. So it's pretty fun.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. And, yeah, so far, all kids in Churchill have been safe, and we're sure that that'll happen again this year. And let me tell you, in Churchill, I've seen some of the best Halloween costumes I've ever seen in my entire life. They take Halloween pretty seriously here. It is pretty darn cool. It's lots of fun, so we're really looking forward to it. What is the current population of humans in Churchill? Is it still around 900 or so? It grows during bear season.
That's the number I hear is 800-900 people.
Yeah, so there's definitely, the polar bears expand a lot farther than the town of Churchill, but there are more polar bears in this population than humans for sure. So, but most of them never really come near to Churchill. We kind of just get a few around here, around Buggy Land, and they don't need to be here. There's a lot of area around here that the buggies are not able to go, but these polar bears seem totally fine with hanging out with us for a while, and they're able to get up and walk away at any point, and we're really grateful that they don't mind our company a lot of the time. So it's pretty nice to be here. Is it true that polar bear skin is black? That is true. Polar bear skin is black. Their fur is actually colorless. We're not 100% sure why their skin is black. Of course, one of the main theories is that it was able to absorb heat better and retain that. And so that's kind of what we go with. But to be honest, it might just be one of those random things that happened and stuck. But yeah, it's kind of cool. Black skin, white fur, or clear fur. Their fur is also hollow, so it can hang on to warm air better, which is kind of neat. Hold it against their body. They've, of course, got really, really thick fur to help insulate them. And they've got many inches of fat, especially when they're healthy bears. And that fat does help insulate them, but is largely used for insulating them in water and also helping buoyancy. Polar bears are really good floaters. They're good divers, but man, they can float. Yeah, they're pretty buoyant. Okay, so let's see what else we can talk about. What other questions do we have? Just scrolling. Do polar bears have any predators? So, not really in the sense of usual predators. Polar bears are top of their food chain in the Arctic ecosystem. Occasionally, we do see them predate each other. So, males may occasionally go after a cub or each other if a polar bear is sick or injured. If a polar bear dies, maybe likely that another bear will eat it. But really, it's polar bears. And then there are some groups of humans that do hunt polar bears. This is the traditional hunting right from a culture that's thousands of years old and has had polar bears as part of their culture, a very important part. And they're really, they really tightly control how many polar bears are taken. It's a very respectful relationship and managed very closely and in line with traditional knowledge as well as science to make sure that they're managed in such a way that we keep polar bears coming back and the populations as healthy as we can in the face of the changing climate. So it's really very limited. Polar bears mostly are doing the hunting. I sure wouldn't want to be a seal out here. That whole breathing hole thing would just, every time you go to take a breath, it might maybe having a polar bear up there. That seems like quite the life. I don't know about that. I'd rather be a polar bear. Do polar bears hunt any small animals while they wait for the ice to form? That's a good question. So, polar bears are pretty quick. They can sprint for at about 30 kilometers an hour for short distances, but it's really not a good use of their energy to hunt a small animal that's maybe a little bit quicker. There's maybe some small mammals out here. I've never seen a polar bear actively go after one. I'm sure if a little mouse or something happened to run into a polar bear paw, the polar bear would happily eat it.
Chasing a muskrat once.
Wow, there you go.
On one of the ponds here. It was a pretty short chase. The muskrat got away. But, it was kind of neat to see.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Do you think it was for food or for fun?
I think it was bored.
Yeah.
Just needed something to do.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
One of my favorite moment on the cams that's ever happened was a few years ago, and you were there, when we had that polar bear sleeping near the coast, and a wolverine. Oh, I'd never seen a wolverine before, but we had a wolverine run up like just run at this polar bear from quite a distance.
Oh, yeah.
And it kind of gave it a 1-2 little haze, and the polar bear didn't really seem to know what the heck was going on. It was hilarious. It did. It kind of woke up and it stood up and was kind of like, what the heck is this wolverine doing? And the wolverine kind of looked at it and ran away. It was one of the most bizarre wildlife encounters ever. One of my favorites I've ever seen. So I'll keep an eye out for wolverines too. But not for a second did the polar bear seem to consider eating it. It was kind of just a play thing. It was pretty darn funny. I don't know. That was pretty cool. Okay, and we have a question about the polar bear cubs at the zoo in Rennen in the Netherlands. They don't know yet, and they probably will know soon where those cubs are going to go. So the cubs will be leaving the zoo at some point when they're about 1.5 years old. And we'll keep you updated. The zoos over in Europe, everywhere, are so busy in the summer giving updates. Updates are few and far between, but we're going to try to update you guys more often on what's going on there. I know that they have a wonderful following on those cams, and we're sorry we haven't given you more information, but we are working on it. And I promise this community will be, after the zoo, the first to know about where those cubs are going, and we'll see if maybe even more cams will be set up. So we will keep you updated on them, and also Siku and his family. Keep you updated on what they're doing, because there are some pretty cool polar bears too. And it's so neat to just watch, polar bears have fun and play, and they have some pretty neat surroundings in that zoo. I sure liked watching those cubs grow up. They were just so cute. They had a lot of fun interactions. It was pretty cool. So with that, what else? We have another question. Okay. What is the lifespan of an average polar bear? Can you estimate age when you are handling them? So this is a really cool question. So the oldest polar bear that we know ever lived was Debbie at the Assiniboine Zoo in Winnipeg, and she passed away when she was 42. So that was in captivity. We know that in the wild...
Good health plan, they like to say.
A good health plan?
Yeah, she had a good health plan.
Yeah. One of the people that worked with her is actually a buggy driver now, correct? Yeah.
Yep, Buggy Bob.
Buggy Bob. So we know one of her handlers, and he... do you want to tell the story of what happened when she passed away?
Yeah, Buggy Bob actually, he picked up a career in shooting fireworks after he left the zoo and before he became a buggy driver. So in order to... And Debbie was actually from this area here. Yeah, she was a rescued bear, I think from the Churchill dump maybe. We'll have to ask Bob about that one. I forget the exact details on that one. But anyways, they wanted to return her to the Hudson Bay area. So they took her cremains and they loaded her in a firework, and Bob shot her out over the Hudson Bay. So, so Debbie returned.
Yeah, Debbie's ashes are all across Hudson Bay. Pretty, and so are her keepers, actually, right? Her favorite keeper, the guy that took care of her for years and years and years. When he passed away, Bob did the same thing and scattered his ashes with Debbie's. So that's a pretty cool thing about this coast that we're on here. That's pretty neat. But anyway, back to the question. So polar bears, females will live longer than males in the wild. Females may live to their mid, maybe late 20s. Males maybe early mid 20s type thing. And the way we age them is pretty neat. So because polar bears go through this period where they're eating a lot and then fasting, they kind of have this growth cycle, which is really similar to a tree, where trees have a growing season and then a decreased growing season. And because of this, their teeth grow in rings. So polar bears have this tiny tooth behind their big canine. We call it a premolar, and it's just this little itty-bitty thing. And biologists are able to pop that out in the field. And they'll only ever do that once, even if they recapture a bear. There's only ever a need to take one tooth. And if we cut that tooth in half, we can actually count the rings on it to find out how old a polar bear is, which is a pretty cool way to figure out age, I think. So we can't do that in humans, but it's a nice way. It does take a while, so that's not something we do right away in the field. We can kind of like roughly estimate how old a bear is in the field. We'll know if it's a coy or a yearling. We'll know if it's a subadult, so that's between the ages of about 2 and 5, 3 and 5, and then we can kind of guess if it's an adult and an old adult, or maybe a teenage bear or something like that. But we do have to wait to get the tooth results back to find out their actual age, and then if we ever capture the bear again, we just kind of extrapolate the age from their original tooth. So pretty neat. So I think we will start our wrap up now. Thank you guys for the questions. We just love this explorer community. The enthusiasm to see these bears is just really kind of heartwarming, and it makes us love our job even more. So I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do this season. So for those of you that weren't with us last season, PBI has a couple different things that we do. So we do these live chats, and this year we will be doing them between Monday and Friday. And we're going to be doing this for about the next 3 to 4 weeks. So we'll see how long bear season goes for, but definitely the next 3 weeks and maybe after that. And the schedule is posted online, and we also will have reminders for people when there will be a live chat. And we'll be having different experts come in. So, and unfortunately, won't be BJ every time, but we will get other sea ice experts in. Thank you, Jen, for today. We have some people that live and work with polar bears. We have just all sorts of cool guests coming up, and we will try to get people on camera as much as we can. We are also going to try, so for those of you that watch the Beluga Cam, you saw that Haley had a headset and she was able to do a little more live narration as things were happening. And we're going to see if we can get that working this year. I'm not going to promise anything, but if we can, we're going to try to get that headset working. So if something super cool is happening and there's no live chat scheduled, we can still hop on air and talk about it and let you know what's going on in real time. So we're pretty excited about that. At PBI, we also have educational programming, which I talked about early on. We call it our Tundra Connections program. And we have set webcasts that are largely aimed at schools, but also zoos and just members of the general public that have themes and certain topics we're talking about. So, for example, a lot of this week, our Tundra Connections will be focused on climate change and polar bears and the talks in Paris that are coming up this December and how that all kind of fits together. And we're also talking to kids from the north and kind of connecting what's happening in their backyards to places all over the world, which is pretty cool. The first week of November is Polar Bear Week, so that's really exciting for us. We've got just a polar bear extravaganza of fantastic people that are here. We're going to be doing some really fun broadcasting. It should be super cool, so check out that. We also have challenges during that week and all sorts of ways you can get involved. And then our last week is with Discovery Education, and we have some really fun webcasts for kids that week. But again, also for adults, we've got a segment about polar bears and penguins, and also one about the growler bear, the grizzly polar hybrid, so stay tuned for that. And we will be in the chat windows as much as we can, weekend and weekday. And we'll keep these live cams going and be working constantly to find you the best bear shots and keeping you up to date on polar bears and answering your questions throughout the season. Is there anything you want to add?
I just want to say thanks to Explore and to all you viewers out there tuning in. Look forward to chatting with you here over the next couple of weeks.
Totally. Yeah, and again, we'd love to thank explore.org. Without them, this wouldn't happen, so they're just wonderful. Thank you so much. Also, Frontiers North Adventures, who donates Buggy One to us throughout the season so we can do these things. And they also own the Tundra Buggy Lodge, where a lot of our scientists and ourselves stay at night, and they feed us, and they're just great hosts. And also Parks Canada for helping us out with the Cape Cam Towers, amongst many other things. They're a great organization or governmental group. And the CNSC, the Churchill Northern Study Center, for hosting the new Aurora Cam. So we've got a lot of great people we're working with. And of course, thank you to the viewers, because none of this would happen if you guys weren't interested. So we sure look forward to getting to know you guys better and answering your questions for the next few weeks. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
We will talk to you soon.